Hello. Right, we're going live. Right, good evening. This is an interview that I advertised a little while back, and I reiterated it yesterday. It's with absolute pleasure and delight that I'm met once again with Wilfred. Wilfred is a former barrister and one of the UK's sort of #1 investigators into allegations of satanic ritual abuse. I've known Wilfred for quite a long time now, and we've had a lot of interaction. And I'll pass this over to you in a sec, Wilfred. But the one thing I'll say is that there's been a lot of demand to get you back. And really, as time goes on with this path that I'm on, I'm being met with more and more people that have experienced satanic ritual abuse. And what goes hand in hand with that is that the attacks, which I know you see as a positive thing, that come soon as a mention about Satanism or ritual abuse that involves Satanism and the whole satanic agenda, there is also this agenda to really do their best to silence and discredit me. And like we've seen with people that have spoke out, such as MPs like Geoffrey Dickens, Mike Veal, you know, the ex-Chief Constable of Wiltshire, when they get really near to the mark, this undercurrent of discrediting, disinformation, the want for you to waste your time answering their questions, and everything which actually that you warn me about. So thank you, Wilfred, for coming here. And we're going to be discussing some cases that have gone through the British courts, which ended up in convictions for abuse involving with a satanic element. I'm also armed with this document. I won't show it to the camera, only because for legal reasons, but this is what is termed the RAINS list, and this is a list of people and places that have been involved in satanic ritual abuse, and hopefully you can go on to explain a bit more about this list and its author. So once again, thank you ever so much, Wilfred, and I'll pass it over to you because I know you are well prepared.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you. Just to comment on some of the things you mentioned, the SRA survivors coming forward, it's not surprising at all, because there are thousands of SRA survivors across the UK who have been waiting for many years to talk about what they suffered. But they were afraid to mention it because they have been disbelieved by so many, and also because of the ongoing systematic cover-up of SRA, part of which is the attacks by the Satanists on whoever mentions SRA publicly. These are not real skeptics. These are Satanists pretending to be skeptics who attack any exposure of SRA. They're not interested in evidence. They're only interested in stopping the mention and exposure of SRA in the UK. So we need to get this straight. Although there are a few genuine skeptics around who are not Satanists, they don't tend to be so vocal and persistent. The vocal, persistent ones are normally Satanists. In fact, I have some names of these people who have been named by SRA survivors as being involved in SRA, these perpetual skeptics. Nothing is ever going to persuade them. They know full well SRA occurs because they participate in it. So we need to be clear about the way that they're covering this up. We need to be clear that many of these skeptics, especially the more vocal they are and the more persistent they are actually Satanists themselves who are up to their neck in SRA. That's why I don't bother with what they say. I know that it doesn't matter what evidence you show them. It's not a question of evidence for them. They just want everybody to be good sheep, well-trained sheep, and do as they're told and not mention SRA publicly. That's the attitude. Regarding the number of SRA survivors, as I mentioned earlier, thousands, it's important to note that there was a documentary on SRA in 1992 on Channel 4 Dispatches program. Yeah. And 15 telephone helplines were set up to help SRA survivors on the night of the transmission of the documentary. And 5 helplines the following day. The helpline dealt with a total of 191 calls, but British Telecoms recorded in the first hour of the helpline 4,500 attempted calls.
Wow.
Now, that's just a small indication of just how big this problem of SRA is in the UK. Just the first hour after the documentary broadcasted the helpline number on screen, there were 4,500 trying to get through to the helplines. And some of the comments of the people who managed to get through to the helplines were as follows, and I quote, "I'll have to die now. Silence is the first rule and I've broken it. They'll kill me for sure now. I've been out 10 years and moved 14 times. Who are you? Can you trace this call? One little girl just cried, 'The devil's got me,' over and over." This is an indication of the level of fear that they had and the level of pressure that they were under, these victims of SRA. Now you can imagine how hard it is for them when they finally get to speak to someone. If that person starts to rubbish what they're saying and say, "Well, I don't believe you, this can't be true," then that is a secondary form of abuse. Then they're being abused again by the very people who should be listening and helping them. So this is the problem that we have in this country. For decades, SRA has been taking place. What happened in the 1992 with this helpline is going to be even worse today, much worse, if it was done again with the helplines being open to the public, because since 1992 until now, very little has been done to tackle SRA. So the problem has grown even bigger. It's like a cancer that's spreading throughout the country. And the only way to deal with this cancer effectively is public exposure, very extensive exposure. And we all have a part to play. It's not just about me and you exposing SRA while the rest of the public just quietly follow along and watch. Everybody has a part to play in informing others about the SRA that takes place in this country. So even a small thing and a very effective thing to do is to share the link to this film, this interview, with one's contacts. Share it far and wide. The more people who know about SRA in this country, the better, because then the public start to realize this is a real problem. This is something that's really happening. And they start to see through the pretense that these fake skeptics are making to keep us quiet.
If I can talk about this fake skeptics, people that come into me, there's people that are suffering from what is termed DID, this dissociated identity disorder. Their memories are coming back because their memories have been blanked. One woman, she was sold into prostitution as a young teenager, and she only remembered the fact that she was involved into pornography and prostitution when she found magazines of herself, because she was drugged and she don't remember it. But the thing is, she said that there was more money was given to her pimp when she was taken to satanic rituals, but they wanted her awake, they wanted her lucid, so she was given hallucinogenic drugs, so she was awake but she couldn't remember. So when her memory come back, it was raddled with like butterflies and rabbits and things like that. So these people are getting attacked by what's classed as false memory syndrome. Also, when you get institutions that people might go to their church, whatever, they're not believing them. I know that Tracy and myself, we had a meeting at Westminster Cathedral. It was meant to be with Vincent Nichols. Ahead of it, it was deputised down to his bishop, and he had no interest in talking about Satanism, child abuse, or anything. What is interesting is that in this list, and I'll pass over to you in a minute, this range list, I'm looking through it, and there's someone high up in the Catholic Church is mentioned in here. So no wonder they won't. There's also names of senior police officers. One of them was on a unit that I was on. They're on this list. So these people are gatekeepers. So when the information comes through, it gets gatekeepered and it doesn't go anywhere. So can we just deal with the thing of like false memory syndrome, and also go on about the validity of this range list?
Yes. It's important to note that the people who fabricated this so-called false memory syndrome, which is not a scientifically proven syndrome at all, have their own histories of having to deal with allegations of pedophilia. So there's a lot of vested interest there. to claim that these memories are false. It's the same as the fake skeptics who have a huge vested interest because they're actually Satanists in saying that SRA doesn't exist. So we've got all these people giving us their shadow theater, not who they claim to be, saying, for example, oh, these are false memories, or saying SRA doesn't exist. So we always got to look deeper at these people and what their motivations are and their personal vested interests are. And regarding memories being recalled, it's a survival mechanism for people to forget trauma.
Yep.
This is so that something worse doesn't happen to their minds, because the trauma is just so horrific, it's so awful. If I have a chance, I'm going to describe a little bit of a SRA survivor's testimony, which gives you just some idea of just how awful it is. And it's unimaginably evil and horrific. So it's not surprising that in order to cope with this trauma, they shut down their minds, they forget about it. But when they finally retrieve those memories are accurate. They're not false memories, they're not fake memories. Nobody wants to have such memories, but the memories come back because these are memories of things that actually happened. So that's when it's important to take the memories seriously and investigate seriously these events. We all forget some things sometimes, but just because we've forgotten them and we recall them later doesn't mean they're fake.
Yeah.
So this is something that is important to focus on. And generally speaking, allegations of abuse are not made up. There may be a few allegations that are made up, but they are just a tiny minority. The vast majority of allegations of sex abuse, for example, by children, are not made up.
I was just going to say, in all my years of interviewing children, we had one case where the child was lying, just one case. So you're right. On the whole, children do not lie.
Yeah, exactly. Why should children lie about sex abuse? It's such an awkward issue for them as well.
Yeah.
Just like, why should people fake memories of such severe, horrific trauma, only to be exposed to the disbelief of others and even the taunts of others? What's in it for them? What's the point? Yeah. So we need to use a bit more common sense here and realize that there are people with huge vested interests to say that these memories are fake, and that these memories, as with all of us when we forget things from time to time, are not fake just because we've forgotten them for a while and then retrieve them later. No, they're absolutely accurate and should be treated as such, and should be, at least at the very minimum, investigated properly and thoroughly by the police to see what serious crimes may have occurred. So that's very important to remember. For the Raines list, the creator of the Raines list was the late Dr. Joan Coleman, who was one of the top psychiatrists dealing with patients with dissociative identity disorder. And she had more than 30 years experience and more than 30 years of testimonies by SRA survivors, because the vast majority of people with DID and what used to be called multiple personality disorder are survivors of SRA. We need to take careful note of that, because that's one way to find out how much SRA is going on, is the amount of DID that exists in a society. Yeah. Although not every SRA survivor gets DID, a large number of them do. And so I've had therapists saying to me more than 80% of their clients with DID were SRA survivors. And the remaining small minority had DID, but not as a result of SRA. So this is a very large proportion. What Dr. Joan Coleman did, because she came across VIPs' names coming up repeatedly.
Well, they're repeatedly in here. Yeah.
Yes. So she came up with a system, a very good system, where if at least 2 SRA survivors who did not know each other, who were independent of each other, mentioned the same VIP doing SRA, that name would go on the reigns list. Minimum 2, that was her standard. She also shared with me the names of some VIPs, UK VIPs involved in SRA, who were not on the reigns list, probably because she was quite elderly by then and she was not able to constantly update the list. And we're talking a lot of VIPs involved. And we're talking about some VIPs who are right at the top, like Edward Heath. It's important to note that in the reigns list, Edward Heath is identified as having 5 independent witnesses saying he did SRA, and Operation Conifer, the Wiltshire police investigation into him, said 6 independent witnesses said he did SRA.
30 witnesses came forward saying that they'd been sexually abused by Ted Heath, and I personally have spoken to 2 and I've interviewed both of them, and they are in no dispute it was Ted Heath. And when we're on in about validity, there's names on here that I know. There's 2 names of people that I've served in the police with. There is one name of a man who's dead, so I'm going to name him, Lord Montague of Bewley, and I've spoken to his son, and his son is a very brave man who's actually written a book about the sexual abuse he endured, not only by his father, Lord Montague, who anally raped him, as did other members of Winston Churchill's cabinet. He also goes on about the sexual abuse he endured at the private, well-known public schools, we call it in this country, of Eton. You know, so there are names that in there that I can give testimony to. You know, so you're right. But can we just talk about, you know, when I go on about child abuse, I actually sometimes, and I'm doing it a lot more now, say this isn't abuse. Telling someone to F off is abuse. This is rape and torture. I've dealt with people that cannot hold down jobs because they defecate themselves because their bowels have been so badly damaged. Their spines have been injured because they've been anally raped from such a young age. Women who can't have children, or if they do, there's major complications because their wombs are badly disaligned. You know, the ones that have end up with long-term complications because they've been infected with syphilis and all sorts of diseases which didn't get treated at the right time. So when we talk about SRA, can we talk about why they use children and what actually goes on at a satanic ritual?
Yes. The SRA, when we refer to SRA, we are including a lot of things which are pretty awful, which are deliberately done to the victims. SRA is a brutal form of mistreatment which includes sexual abuse, physical abuse, psychological abuse, and is targeted at children and vulnerable adults. And it is done in the context of Satanist rituals. And the purpose of SRA is to obtain power.
Yep, I've heard that. I've heard that from a rapist said he actually feels empowered when he has sex with a child.
But as compared to a rapist, Satanists pursue this practice of SRA because they believe it will give them more power and it will please the one whom they worship, the devil.
Right.
So they're doing this for their own belief system's purposes, which is to worship the devil, get power for themselves, get power for the devil. That's why in SRA you also have the additional element of ritual murder, ritual sacrifice. Right. Because blood sacrifice brings power to the Satanists, so they believe. And so there are numerous reports of ritual sacrifices in the UK, including of babies, of children.
I've spoke to one woman, sorry to interrupt you, but I just want to bolster up what you're saying. I spoke to one woman who said to me, John, I've murdered a child. And I said, you have to explain that, please. And she said, I've cut a baby's throat. She said, but I was 5 years old. I was made to do it. And the baby was under a cloth and I pulled it out and they made me cut the throat. She said, but I didn't do it right. So they punished her sexually and violently because she didn't want to kill this child and she was made to do it. She's actually reported this to the police, you know, so, and I'm a 100% believer.
Yes. I've come across a number of SRA survivors as well in this country who have told me about how when they were children, their hands were put over a dagger and pressed the dagger into the ritual sacrifice victim's body. They are forced to participate in ritual sacrifice in order to give them a bloodlust, to corrupt them, to make them see life as cheap, and to make them guilty of shedding the blood of others. And so corruption of children is a very important part of SRA from the Satanist point of view. So unlike, say, for example, so-called ordinary pedophilia, and I only use the word ordinary not to put it down as not being important or serious, but to distinguish it from SRA. In ordinary pedophilia, the pedophile would not be so fussed about getting the child to participate in sexually abusing other children, but it's a very important priority for Satanists to get the child to abuse other children, to even kill other children. We know, for example, in the Hampstead SRA case, that the children's testimonies included being forced to hurt other children and even kill sacrificial victims. So this is common in SRA because they're trying to twist the children's minds, corrupt them, and turn the children into images of themselves, so that when they grow older, they will be just as bloodthirsty and corrupted and perverse as the Satanist abusers who abuse them. And this is how they also grow their following, their movement, and force these young people into their mindset, who will later grow up to become just as bad as the adult abusers.
I was just going to say, how do they get away with it? But we know that they don't. Sometimes people get caught. Now, we got names here of police officers. One was high up in the unit that I was on, that covered up children that were being raped and prostituted. Now, a book that was written called Dances with the Devil by Audrey Harper, she actually states in this book that she was taken into Satanism through her life as a street prostitute, and her coven, which was based down in Surrey, was actually encouraging her and rewarding her with drugs and everything else if she was to go and pick up other street children for sex parties. Now, that tied in very much with what the kids said to me. And what Audrey says in her book, that these children didn't experience a satanic ritual. It's just that the coven members liked having sex with children. And she was out there to recruit them and to feed them the children for these parties, which linked in very much with what I was told, you know. So people do speak out. They don't expect people to speak out. They expect a lot of people to either go crazy or kill themselves. And when they do speak out, they're easily denigrated. And we see the same people coming forward all the time to denigrate. I've been attacked by a leading satirical magazine, we'll leave it at that, for speaking out about this. They've attacked the person who then mentioned he was raped by Ted Heath. You know, and but there are cases that have gone through the courts. Now, it's strange because there's a group of very odd people that always attack me and those that work with me when I speak out against satanic abuse. And one of the things they want to do is waste my time, and they're always saying, Jon Wedger's a liar, there's these cases, we don't hear about them. But today we've got a list of cases that have gone through the British courts. They've been tried in our justice system, and they're out for public domain. Is there any chance we could share some of them with the people, so just put these people silent?
Yes, we can share it, but I can guarantee you that these people will not go silent for the simple reason that they couldn't care less what the evidence is.
No, you're right.
They will never let the facts and evidence get in the way of their conclusions.
No, I agree.
They will never let the evidence get in the way of their conclusions. They can only make one conclusion: there is no SRA, because they themselves are Satanists.
Yeah.
The most vocal and persistent critics are usually the Satanist abusers themselves,
Of course.
pretending to be skeptics.
Yeah.
It's all a shadow theatre.
And no one admits to it anyway.
Yes, they'll never admit to it. And that's why there's no point trying to reason with them.
No.
Because you'll get nowhere and you'll just waste your time.
Yeah.
The important thing is to reach out to people who are reasonable and don't have the vested interest to cover it
I
up.
want to say this now, that for those, my dissenters out there, I really don't care. I'm not here for you. But for those that want to come forward and speak to me, come forward and speak to me. We welcome any information. We do look into some of the stuff that comes our way, but we're very short on the ground. But we're here and we will listen to you. But for those that want to attack me, do your best, because I really don't care for you. I'm really not bothered, you know. But there's some important lessons you've taught me about that, Wilfred, as well. You know, that if we upset a Satanist, then actually, hey ho, we're doing a good job, aren't we?
Exactly. If there's one group of people in this world you need to be upsetting, it's the Satanists.
Yeah.
Because everything evil in this world you can trace back to them wanting to promote more of it and to grow more and more evil in this world, as if there isn't enough evil in the world already.
Yeah.
So they're out to transform our society in the worst possible way. Anything you can do to annoy them, to stop them, to obstruct their agenda, then that's a good thing. Yeah. That's a great achievement as far as I'm concerned. Yes, so I have this list of 10 cases which were successfully prosecuted in the British courts, and where the SRA evidence was clearly and openly shared during the prosecution of the case, and they were successfully prosecuted, which means that the evidence was believed and accepted to the high standard that is required in the British courts, which is beyond reasonable doubt. Yeah. So you can say that Satanist ritual abuse in this country has been proven beyond reasonable doubt. Oh. Now, these 10 cases were put together by 2 professional British journalists. One is Tim Tate and the other is Andrew Boyd. Yeah. These 2 separate lists were put together, combined together for this list that I have in front of me, and has also been updated because the original list was put together in the early 90s. So there have been some new cases since then that have been added to this list. It's important to remember that though we have these successful prosecutions, for every one case that you see on this list, there's probably hundreds, if not thousands more, that have gone unprosecuted, uninvestigated even, and for which the victims are still waiting for justice.
But also, there's cases that may have been prosecuted, but they haven't attached a satanic element to them. So there may be cases that have been of rape and things like that, but haven't...
I mean, it's not helpful when they leave out the satanic element, because then it just helps to cover up the issue even further.
But that could be a legal thing by the investigating team or the CPS or something like that. Just
sometimes the CPS want to leave it out. But as I said, it's not helpful for the big picture. The big picture is to expose this issue publicly so that the government and the authorities will be under much more pressure to deal with it rather than sweeping it under the carpet, as they have been doing for decades. So some of the more recent cases on this list, for example, in Cornwall, 2 members of a witches' coven in St. Ives, Cornwall, were convicted at Truro Crown Court in December 2012 for their ritualistic, sickening sex abuse of young girls, jailing Jack Kemp for 14 years and Peter Petrowsk for 18. Judge Graham Cottle told them, and I quote, "The offences range from the extremely serious to the truly horrifying." End of quote. The judge said that the scars left on the victims were so obvious that it would seem extremely unlikely that either of them have any real prospect of recovery.
Unbelievable.
That's how pessimistic the judge was. Petrowsk was convicted of rape, aiding and abetting an attempted rape, and indecent assault. Kemp was convicted of 10 sexual offences. So this was in St. Ives, Cornwall, and the convicted Satanist abusers were pretending to be white witches,
right,
or white wizards, and they were actually doing SRA in their coven, and this was exposed and investigated by the police. Thankfully, they succeeded in bringing the perpetrators to justice, but obviously from the judge's remarks you can see just how seriously damaged the victims were. Then there's the other recent case. On March 11, 2011, Colin Batley, the leader of a Satanist coven, was convicted at Swansea Crown Court of more than 20 sexual offences against children, including 11 rapes. He and other Satanists had ritually abused children in Kidwelly, Wales, where their coven was based. The children, some as young as 11, were subjected to, and I quote, organized and systematic abuse by Batley, his wife, and 2 women coven members. Jacqueline Marling, 42, was jailed for 12 years for aiding and abetting rape, causing prostitution, indecency with a child, and inciting a child to engage in sexual activity. Batley's wife, Elaine, 47, was jailed for 8 years on 3 charges of indecency with a child and sexual activity with a child. Shelley Miller, 35, was jailed for 5 years for indecency with a child and inciting a child to engage in sex. A 5th defendant, Vincent Barden, 70, admitted assaulting an underage girl.
What was coming out of that is that there is no disparity between male and female offending. You know, so you're getting females offending, women offending just as much as men on a sexual level against children, which is quite staggering, really. You know, because on the normal sort of sexual abuse against children, it tends to be predominantly men. However, women are complicit in it, and there is a failing to protect as well. But here, they seem to be very as much active as the men.
Yes, that's true. There is a deliberate move within Satanism to recruit women into the covens, partly also because women bear children and can be used to bring more children into the coven. And obviously Satanism needs women because a lot of it, especially in the UK, is intergenerational, passed on from one generation to another, and obviously they can't do that without having women to bear children within the Satanist families. But also it ticks the other box of the Satanist agenda, which is to turn the natural order of things upside down. So, for example, Satanists would want to turn upside down the maternal instinct that women have to protect and nurture children. Right. And what better way than to get them involved in ritually abusing children?
Yep.
So this is the threat of Satanism. It's all about taking the natural order of things, or if you're a believer in God, God's order of things, and turning it upside down and perverting it. And that is Satanism at its core agenda for society, which is to pervert and distort a lot of things throughout our society that help our society to survive and to thrive, and to call what is evil good and to call what is good evil. Yeah. So this is the game plan of the Satanists, and this is the other threat that we face from the Satanists. This is why they love to corrupt children, because children in the natural order of things are innocent, but they want to corrupt them so that they can be just as perverted as some adults are, just as corrupted and evil as some adults are. Same thing with women. They want to make these women just as harmful to children as some men are, and to totally bury their maternal instinct.
Right, and we just if people can sort of just let us know, because there's been a couple of comments coming through that I'm not in shot here. So and I think, well, the camera's turned and we can't turn it back now, because it's once it sets, you can't reset it. So just how it is. So if I am in shot, please let me know. I'll try and squeeze nearer to Wilfred. Yeah. So we'll just, are we in shot now? Anyone? So if we just take the camera back a little bit, and so that's that. Do apologise. It's just the equipment and everything else. But you're saying about an inversion. There's one guy that speaks to me quite a bit, and he was born into a satanic family, and he did get out in his late teens. But he was saying that part of the black mass, as it were, he'd be given the like the holy bread, but theirs was made out of human shite and urine and things like that, and it was baked into like a bread, and he was given that to eat. I mean, if people can imagine that this is what they do. So, and they do hide behind this veil of witchcraft and paganism and things like that, but ultimately these people are eating other people's shite and they are raping children. This is what we're dealing with.
Yes, that's true. I interviewed an SRA survivor who was taken to these satanic masses as a child, and they would bake human ashes into the bread that they ate and then drink blood with that, and that was their form of satanic black mass. And then after that they would gang rape her, and this was all done within the premises of a church that they had managed to infiltrate, because at that time when this woman was a child, the vicar of that church was actually a Satanist.
Yeah.
So this is quite common. Audrey Harper's book that you mentioned earlier, Dance with the Devil, she talked about her and her coven deliberately going out to break into churches and do black masses and rituals in those churches to desecrate them at night. And it's unfortunately taking place across a lot of the country. I make a joke about the Satanists that, you know, they eat a lot of human crap, and that's why they're so full of shit. No, I agree. And there's quite a few people that come to me that have been the victims of sort of organised prostitution of children within religious institutions, especially like the Catholic care homes. I spoke to two brothers that were in a care home in Belfast, and the priests were pimping them out. A good friend of mine, happened to him in a place run by nuns in North London. And so really, when they're hiding behind the name of Jesus, I mean, that must itself be the work of Satanism, you know? Yeah, that's very true. A common cover, disguise, that the Satanists use is to go into churches. You and I know an ex-Satanist who told us very perceptively that when the Satanists do something, they like to achieve multiple objectives with that action.
Yeah.
So we have that with the Satanists infiltrating churches, because not only do they have a good cover when they go into a church, and a church is easy to infiltrate because churches have to by nature be quite open to new people coming in.
Yeah.
But also, if they get exposed, it makes the church look bad, because people will think, oh, these so-called Christians have done this abuse. Well, they're not so-called Christians. They're Satanists pretending to be Christians.
Of course, yeah.
And at this point, I'd like to share a bit of the testimony of an SRA survivor. Very powerful testimony. I'll share some extracts where she mentions a bit of this. She describes the SRA that she experienced in the UK as follows: rapes, gang raped, objects inserted, and I'll add an explanation. Objects inserted, you can assume that it's into her genitalia.
Yeah.
Drowning methods, car batteries inserted internally and externally to shock me, drugged, tied up, hung up like a piece of meat, photos taken, recording, hunted like an animal, except I was the hunt, and assaulted when caught, left sitting for long periods of time, locked in a room with no toilet, put into a carpet, and it covered over, suffocation, made to eat the unimaginable, mental, emotional, and psychological torture, sadistic psychopaths, that's what they were. And to the outside world, they were the pillars of society, successful family, and so religious.
Again, there's two elements I want to elaborate on. One of them is there's a guy was in the police with me, and again, for legal reasons, I'm not going to mention his name, but he'll be exposed at some point. And whenever there's any sort of big case coming out, this fella always crops up, always turns up. And I've been told by a couple of people that he's actually involved in Satanism as well. The other thing is, there's a lovely woman. She's written a book. I can't remember the name of her book. If it comes to me, I'll put it out there and try and promote it. And she was kept in a shed for most of her life with another girl. They were adopted by a well-known pillars of the community. This was out near High Wycombe, and the father, the foster father, was involved in Satanism and was pimping her out. But again, he won like Foster Carer of the Year award, and he was specialised in ethnic children. This was back in the 60s and the 70s, ethnic children and disabled kids. So you can only imagine what they went through, because no one would listen to either of them back then, you know. And again, they was very religious, involved with the church, and winning these sort of local authority awards and a national award. So there is a need to keep up this persona, this pretense that they are a pillar of the community, when actually the opposite is. And the other thing is, people say to me, you know, in trying to dispel the myth that it goes on, that we don't read about it in the papers. And well, where is it? Why is it not being exposed? You know, and that is a point. There is hardly anything in the papers about it. It does get in there every now and then. I do know that the case in the Orkney Islands, the police actually cited that case in their training manual for sexual abuse training, because it was part of the manual when I was doing it. But why is that? Why is this not getting out in the media?
That's a good question. I would point out and stress that the two successful, more recent SRA cases that were successfully prosecuted in the UK were, at the time of the successful prosecution, widely reported on in the UK media. So it's a nonsense to claim that these cases don't exist. You only need to look back on those dates and those periods when the cases reached a successful conclusion, that the media reported on it. Unfortunately, they don't keep up a persistent reporting on this issue. Most of them don't, for two reasons. One is this general cultural attitude, very misguided attitude, that you don't want to talk about SRA. You don't want to talk about SRA, and SRA doesn't exist, or if it does exist, it's very small. Now, this is very harmful. It only helps the perpetrators. Unfortunately, the media is not very enlightened on this issue compared to, say, for example, the US media, who are relatively more bold on reporting on SRA, relatively more courageous in exposing it. We don't have very courageous media when it comes to this subject. One exception, one wonderful exception, being the Sunday Express and the Daily Express, who reported in 3 articles on Jimmy Savile's Satanism and SRA. The other reason, of course, and you and I know this reason quite well, is that there are several journalists in the mainstream media who are themselves Satanists, and we know names.
Well, I've been attacked by one myself.
Yes, not surprising. We know that they are Satanists. We know that they've been identified by SRA survivors who witnessed their SRA. And we know that they are in the media to help cover up the SRA and to stop the media reporting honestly on these issues. But we also got to bear in mind that the media themselves are not actually there to inform us. When it comes to the mainstream media, their top priority is not to inform us. Their top priority is to indoctrinate us into having a certain set of beliefs and thoughts, including the belief that SRA does not exist. So sometimes, yes, they have to report on it, because the good news is that there's been a successfully prosecuted SRA case. Yeah. And it would be unprofessional for them not to report on it. But then they quickly move on to other subjects, and they don't want to touch the subject again until something big happens. But there are certain newspapers and media that we know are notorious for constantly trying to cover up SRA and attack those who expose it. You mentioned that satirical magazine. I know for a fact it's owned by Satanists and run by Satanists. For some of the mainstream media, it's infiltration by Satanist journalists who influence their editorial policy on these subjects. I know of some media who know about SRA a lot more than we realize, but they are too afraid to report on it. So they're not doing their job to inform the public. But as I said, it's not their top priority to inform. So we need the alternative media. We need films like this. That's why I said one good way to inform the public is to share with your contacts far and wide this film, the link to this film, and to our previous interview in March, to use to the full the internet, email, YouTube, to get the message out, because the mainstream media is not likely to be giving us a lot of support on exposing SRA for some time to come.
We're seeing that someone contacted me the other day and said that they wanted to come forward and speak out about abuse, but they were frightened because of the recent Carl Beach case. And Carl Beach, for those who don't know, was a man who's come forward to say that he was abused for many years as a child, and he's named various politicians and people in, you know, high society and of privilege and power. Now, what's happened with Carl Beach, that he was a victim of abuse himself. Unfortunately, he went on to get convictions of offences against children, but mainly in respect to images. But that's a byproduct sometimes of someone who's incredibly damaged by abuse. I'm not saying that all people are damaged by abuse, far from it. I'm just saying that this is what goes on. So Carl Beach, they couldn't really discredit him that much. I even spoke to a member of the police who was friends with the lead investigator, who said that they believed Carl. So what they did, and this was an age-old sort of system, is they can't attack the information, so they attack the source of the information. So they then sent out a big character assassination on Carl Beach and his previous convictions, which meant legally that the defence team could have then attacked the prosecution witnesses, which they did not do. And one of them was a politician who, again, can't name, but it's not too difficult to find out who he is, who had convictions against boys, not underage boys, but they were sexual offences against boys, young boys. This guy is shouting and screaming to try, and then anyone who comes forward and makes similar allegations gets disbelieved. So what they're doing is really that they're slamming the door hard in the face of anyone speaking out, and that's just on sexual abuse. We've not taken it the further hurdle to the satanic religious element to it. And what we're seeing is people like Carl Beach. Carl Beach got 18 years in prison. I mean, my God, horrendous. I mean, why the hell did they give him 18 years? He was a victim, and he was coming forward. We saw Sabine McNeil, who spoke out about the case in Hampstead, and was given 9 years. So the message is loud and clear by the British establishment that if you speak out against this, you'll get crushed. We know, people know what they did to me, the police. One of the guys that was high up in that unit is in this RAINS list. Again, RAINS, RAINS, RAINS list, put RAINS list Satanism, and God bless Spivey, a fellow called Spivey, Chris Spivey, SPIVE. If you put that name in as well, you will get this fully comprehensive list. Go through it, look at it. Very, very credible. Wilfred's gone on about the pedigree of this, and not only that, the sheer professionalism of the woman who compiled it. Read through it, look at the names. This won't surprise a lot of people, but it will surprise quite a few as well. And it's got addresses, it's got all sorts, and it's a public document now. It's on the internet. Again, we've got to be careful what we say and what we don't say, because we are seeing victims and survivors getting crushed by this machine, and we are seeing a lackluster in politicians speaking out. We are seeing politicians' names being mentioned consistently. I'll pass this over to you in a sec, Wilfred, but what I will say is look at these politicians. We have, I can't remember now, I think it's 634 MPs. 634 MPs, right? We're not calling MPs paedophiles. There's a handful we keep hearing about. Handful. We hear about Leon Britton, who's deceased. I heard about him when I was in the police. We hear about Ted Heath on a phenomenal amount of occasions, and again, I spoke to victims of him. There are still people that won't accept that. Lord Janner, we're seeing his son now trying to discredit anyone speaking out about his father, right? The same people, and these are people that were high up in office, and there are names of politicians in this list as well, so this is what we're doing. So let's get back to the point I'm trying to make. People coming forward are getting massively attacked.
Yes, my perception of Carl Beach is that he was either stitched up, which is quite a likely case scenario, or he was working for the authorities right from the beginning to help set up this false narrative of fake allegations being made against VIPs. But we should not be distracted by Carl Beech's conviction. We need to look at all the other even stronger evidence of VIP abuse that exists, which includes the Reigns list, which includes the hundreds, if not thousands, of SRA survivors over the years naming VIPs as their victimizers. Why do the authorities have this obsession with Carl Beech and are ignoring all the other survivors of child sex abuse or SRA who have named VIPs? Because the authorities want to make a very simple narrative. Carl Beech is the one responsible. He fabricated it. We imprisoned him. He's discredited. End of story.
Yeah.
And present that false narrative to the public so that they can all go back to sleep and think that their VIPs do not abuse children. The sad reality that I discovered in 1993, the first year I started working on SRA, is that if a person has the right influence and connections in this country, they can sexually abuse children in the most horrific ways, do SRA, and get away with it. The police are supposed to be protecting the public, not the establishment. They're not supposed to be protecting child abusers or Satanist abusers. But the Satanists have also managed to invert that and make the police, unfortunately, not all the police, but a lot of the police, the protectors of criminals rather than the protectors of the public.
This is about education. I sat in a meeting once with a member of Special Branch, a woman I've known for quite a while, and she dealt with organisations. So there'll be things like the Hells Angels and that. And part of the organisations was cults. And she said, we do monitor like witchcraft groups, pagan groups and satanic groups. So the police know about this on a Special Branch level. And what we saw at the local ICSA, IICSA, the Independent Investigation Inquiry, into child sexual abuse, that Special Branch and the military intelligence were complicit in covering stuff up, and especially when it came to Ted Heath. So they know that this goes on. They do know it goes on, so when I was investigating child sexual abuse, there was hardly any mention of satanic groups. You only got to hear about it because you would deal with it. Now, I, at that time, didn't deal directly with satanic stuff, as we have discussed, but I did deal with Satanism in respect to voodoo, in respect to opium, which is a Jamaican version of voodoo, and a Congolese version, because I mainly worked in a city stroke ghetto type areas, and I dealt a lot with, it was representative of the communities that I was dealing with. So it was going on a hell of a lot, and we would come across like voodoo temples sometimes in people's houses with names written on little sticks in sawdust and bits of chicken and things like that. So it was going on quite a lot in that environment, but there is no education. The police are not educating people. And what we do see is our brothers and sisters over in America are taking it very seriously, like you mentioned. And if I can make a referral to a police sergeant called Ralph Sarchi of the NYPD, who actually teamed up with a priest called Malachi Martin, a Catholic priest, and they were actively going out there and investigating cases of demonic possession and Satanism, and it was part of their official duty. Whereas over here, they just dismiss it.
Yes, I think the police in America are far ahead of the police in the UK when it comes to giving special training to their officers on dealing with satanic crimes, on acknowledging the seriousness of these crimes, although I would qualify that with comments from Americans who work on SRA who say that there's still a long way to go, that the police can do a lot more, but there are a lot of good police officers in America tackling these issues very seriously. The problem in the UK is partly the lack of drive from the leaders of the police and the leaders in government to address this problem of SRA, the extensive membership in UK police of Freemasonry, which also helps to undermine the will to deal with SRA, because sadly there is a lot of interlinks between SRA, Satanism, and Freemasonry. The Freemasons are basically used by the Satanists to spread their influence. They basically control Freemasonry. I'm not surprised that has happened, and it's probably happened many years ago. And I often describe Freemasonry as the handmaiden to Satanism. Unfortunately, a lot of influential people in this country are Freemasons. But I would add that there are still good police officers in this country who would try to do their duty to investigate these cases. It is important for SRA survivors to try and get the police to investigate their cases and not to hide the satanic aspects of their cases. Because if every SRA survivor keeps quiet, hides the satanic aspects of their cases if they go to the police, then SRA is never going to get publicly exposed as it should be. So bring those cases up with the police, ask them to investigate, get your local MP involved if they're not investigating. You'd be surprised that sometimes MPs know a lot more about these issues than you think. And put the pressure on, with the help of your local MP, on the police if they're not investigating. We all have a part to play in exposing SRA, and those of us who are victims of it should be pushing hard for justice, not simply taking no for an answer, not simply hiding away from the issue, but trying to expose it, get justice. That's the way that things change. Nothing's going to happen overnight, but if everybody starts doing their bit, then it's more likely we're finally going to get an effective opposition to SRA in this country. Otherwise, what's going to happen, and I've seen this happen for decades, people all just think of their own comfort, wanting to have an easy life, stepping back, keeping quiet. And so if everybody's too frightened to speak out, nothing's ever going to change. You know, there was this lady, a very heroic lady named Sophie Scholl in Nazi Germany, who was sentenced to death for distributing leaflets attacking Adolf Hitler. And shortly before she was executed by beheading, she said that if nobody speaks out, nothing's ever going to change. Somebody has to speak out. And that was her life's work, because she was only in her early 20s when she was executed. But until today, she's widely recognized as a real heroine. And that's how you change things. Not everybody who speaks out, of course, is going to get executed. But what I'm saying is sometimes people have to get out of the comfort zone and really fight hard for justice. It's not going to be given to us on a silver plate. It's not going to be happening without us speaking out and demanding justice. We have to fight for it. We have to push for it. Sometimes we have to be downright aggressive to get it.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at, again, making a reference to this list, people want to speak out against the police, and then when they do, the one in charge of the unit that's meant to deal with it is on this list. So where do they go? There are people that come to me that were abused within the church, so therefore they don't want anything to do with the church. They don't want anything to do with Jesus, who's like the saviour of the children, because it was priests hiding behind the name of God that did this, and in fact they were doing the devil's work. You know, so there is barriers, and then you get the people that just laugh at them and scoff at them, because we're heading for a period of time where people have no faith in anything. You know, their faith, their God is their phone, their car. That's what they worship. And they don't understand that there is evil out there, and the evil preys on children. And it's like I keep saying, that the song by the Manic Street Preachers, if we tolerate this, then our children will be next. And this is why I do it. I mean, many years ago, if you'd have asked me, maybe I would have entertained it, but I wouldn't have done much about it. It's only now I have people coming to me, people now become my friends that have been victims of this abuse, and I've seen what it's done to their lives. I've seen the destruction, how it is totally eating them up. And you're right, these MPs do know, because I have sat in offices and they've been told to their face that it goes on. But one MP who one of the avid campaigners about paedophile MPs, and he just said it's too above their pay grade, John. They won't do anything. But what I say to people is speak out. You've got these things, right? Mobile phones. This is what I do everything on. I was getting 1 million hits a month. You know, I've just done a YouTube video that has gone transatlantic, which is now pushing for 500,000 hits. People are listening and are waking up and are watching it, and they realise, you know, that what we say has got credibility. You've only got to go out there and do the work I do to find out this is a very, very real problem. And the ones that oppose us, we have to look at them, like I keep saying, with suspicious eyes. Why are they? And I guarantee for a fact that some moron will be doing a video in a week's time about Jon Wedger's talking nonsense, Jon Wedger's, you know, whatever he might be, a disinfo agent. And I've just had some very bizarre hermaphrodite type individual has put some absolute vile nonsense on about me. But you know what? Good. Carry on doing it. Carry on wasting your time, because I will not be wasting my time counteracting you. I don't care for you and what you say. I'm here to team up with Wilfred to go out there to help victims and survivors of sexual abuse and to make sure children don't get hurt. If you want to attack those doing this, then we know who you are. By your deeds shall we know you, and we know your wrong uns, you know, and God help you, because you're going to a bad place. But you're right, Wilfred, but it's people, they want to speak out, but they are so frightened. They are frightened about what the government has deliberately done to Carl Beach and Sabine McNeil, right? That scares them. They're frightened that they won't get any backing from the church, they won't get any backing from the media, they won't get any backing from anyone. They are absolutely petrified. They have nowhere to turn. And when we do things like this, we do become a rock that they can cling to. But we need information and we need specifics. Wilfred's trained as a barrister. I've got detective experience. What I've been doing with people is I've been getting cases that the police have either thrown out or they're not looking at. I've been helping them compile a statement, which if they've got a solicitor to do it would cost them £400 an hour. I'm doing it for nothing. So all those that accuse me of stealing money and that, I'm doing it for nothing. I'm travelling length and breadth of the country and holding down 3 jobs. This isn't about me, but this is what I'm doing. And putting these cases, getting a professional statement, getting them back before the criminal justice system to embarrass the system into doing something, because that's the only way we will bring about change. But you're right in what you say, Wilfred. By sitting there and doing F all will bring about nothing but destruction.
Yes, you're right. If the worst thing you can do is to do nothing, because then you are just being the well-trained sheep that the Satanists want you to be. And we are headed for the slaughter if we don't challenge this issue, because the Satanists want to radically transform our society. Diane Kaur, who was one of the first people to publicly expose SRA back in the 1980s and 90s, she wrote a book called Chasing Satan. At page 13 of that book, she warned that the Satanists want to transform our society, but they will do it secretly, behind the scenes. They will not use open democratic processes to get what they want. And we see in our society today, and over the past decade or so, an increasing chipping away at our freedoms, an increasing chipping away at parental autonomy and authority.
Of course, yeah.
An increasing imposition of the LGBT agenda on us, whether we like it or not, whether we agree with it or not. An increasing limitation on our freedom of expression, whether we like it or not. Not just on speaking out on SRA, but on speaking out on other things, including disagreeing with the LGBT agenda. We can see the hand of Satanists in a lot of these measures. It's like that analogy about slowly boiling a frog. If you slowly boil a frog, by the time it realizes it's being boiled, it's too late. It's going to die. And I'd like to point out that tomorrow is November 11th, that important day when we remember the sacrifices of those who fought in previous wars so that we can have the freedom we have today. Now, they had to make sacrifices. They probably felt a lot of fear.
They did, yeah.
But the definition of courage is not feeling fear. It's feeling fear but doing the courageous thing because you know that there's a more important issue at stake than your fear. So you overcome the fear to do what's important. That's courage. And Imagine if the generations before that had fought in the wars for our freedom had decided, well, I feel fearful about this. This is taking me out of my comfort zone. So I'm not going to do anything. Or I'm going to move to another country where I don't have to serve in the military. Where will we be today? We'd all be enslaved. Unfortunately, we are heading towards enslavement again, but this time enslavement by the Satanist ideology, and the enemy is within, rather than an external enemy attacking us from the outside. But it is a war. I have nicknamed it the Second Battle of Britain. And there are very few people fighting this war, or willing to fight this war. Feeling fear is not an excuse, because freedom doesn't come free. You have to fight for it. You have to sacrifice for it. It doesn't come to you on a silver plate. As we see and as we will remember tomorrow, November 11th, all the sacrifices paid by previous generations for our freedoms, so too we have a responsibility and a duty to fight for these freedoms and to protect also the vulnerable in our society from horrific practices like SRA.
Well, and let's talk about fear. When I go back to what I mentioned earlier about a 5-year-old girl in a church, in a satanic church, whatever it was, whatever the venue was, I think it was actually in a church where they took place, and she was then made to cut a baby's throat, and she didn't do it properly, so they horrifically sexually abused her. So what about her fear? That little kid's fear, you know? And then these people are then silencing the likes, or attempting to silence the likes of me and you, and then onslaught onto the children. So we need to turn this back round. Now, can I just sort of, because there'll be people out there that will be very ignorant to it, what are the sort of things that they should look out for, indicators that Satanism is alive and well and being practiced?
Okay, I'll just add to the comment you just made in that a lot of people's first reaction when they hear about SRA and the importance of doing something about it is, how will this affect me? My safety, for example. And what I suggest is that you think about, first and foremost, putting yourself in the shoes of the victims. How terrified the victims are, how defenseless and vulnerable the victims are, including the children. And think to yourself, if you are feeling afraid, the victim is feeling 1,000 times more afraid than you are, for sure. So stand in the other person's shoes. Do to others as you would have others do to you. As Jesus said, non-Christians would call this the golden rule. Philosophers call this the golden rule. Do to others what you want others to do unto you. If we were those victims of Satanist abusers, wouldn't we want people to speak out against this evil? No. Of course we would. So we should be doing for these victims what we would want others to do for ourselves if we were the victims of SRA. So this is the way to think that is more constructive, rather than thinking, oh, this is too dangerous, how will this affect me, and then retreating into some kind of shell and ignoring the issue. Because if nobody wants to speak out, if nobody wants to do anything about it, if everyone's too fearful, that is exactly going to pave the way for us losing all our freedoms in the end to the Satanists. That is going to guarantee the spread of SRA very, very widely throughout the UK. And in fact, if you think, oh, it's not affecting my children or my family, so I don't care. Yeah. One day it probably will affect
it will.
If you don't do something about it now.
And it already is.
Could be your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren. So we need to not just think of ourselves and our self-interest, but look at the victims and stand in their shoes for a while and see how terrifying it is for them, and see how this is ultimately all going to come back to our family, our children, and us, because it's affecting the whole of society. So how do we do something about it? We all can do something about it. That's the good news. It's not just for Wilfred and Jon and a few others to do most of the work on this. We all have a part to play. First, informing others. We all have social circles that we can inform, contacts that we can inform about this. by forwarding, for example, this interview to our contacts, by forwarding other good information on SRA that can be obtained on the internet, for example, the RAINS list to our contacts, by talking to our contacts about this, if we belong to a church, by talking to our church leader about this, by, if we have a chance to write something, writing about it, getting it out there. We need to get it out to the people. People need to know. You know, we spend a lot of time talking about stuff that isn't important. We can talk about SRA, at least that's important, instead of just gossiping or talking about trivial stuff.
There's the name of a guy in here whose son is a leading politician, a leading Tory politician. Look at this list. You'll see his name on there. It's a very unique surname. And then write to him and ask him, is he involved in it? Or does he relinquish the satanic links that his father had? And this guy's a decision maker in the government. And I say to people, go through this list. It is a public document. It's been on the internet for a very, very long time. There are so many MPs in here, and this isn't just a free-for-all, just listing MPs, because there are people that I've never heard of, which are doctors. There's one person that is in charge of child and adolescent psychiatry. So they're getting themselves as doctors. They're getting themselves in these pivotal positions where they are gatekeepers, and they are influencers in the family courts and the Crown courts and everywhere else. So look, I joined the police. If my father was a criminal, I'd have to account for that, and there's a good chance I'd be kicked out. So these people, there's fathers in here, and there's partners in here of people that are high up in government. Why are they not being kicked out? Why are they not at least being held accountable for what seems as unsavoury relationships, you know?
Yes, well, this leads me to my next suggested action. We all have the right to write to our MPs to raise concerns about government, where government fails to act where they should, or where government is doing the wrong actions. We can write to our MPs or even go and see them, because MPs will have constituency surgeries every week or every 2 weeks. And every constituent has the right to show up at these surgeries to meet and talk with their MPs. So what I would suggest is use that democratic right that you have to raise concerns on behalf of the voiceless SRA survivors and victims across the country. Write to your MP, for example, about Operation Conifer's results and conclusions. The Operation Conifer summary report is on the internet. You can access it and read it for yourself. At pages 59 and 60, they make specific references to Edward Heath's satanic abuse.
Yes, and Mike Veal openly said it on Sky News that he had information that Ted Heath was involved in Satanism.
Yes, exactly. Write to, for example, the Home Secretary and the Justice Secretary and say, what follow-up is being done about this report? You spend £1 million of taxpayers' money on this report, and then you just kind of leave it forgotten on the shelf after it's been published. That's ridiculous. And then you go on and on about Kyle Beach because you want this false narrative of VIPs not committing child abuse to be spread throughout society. Ask tough questions like, what follow-up is being done? Because if the top VIP in this country, the most politically powerful VIP in the UK, could be involved in satanic abuse and child sex abuse, then which VIP in this country couldn't be involved in such things?
Exactly.
Because there was obviously a cover-up that protected Ted Heath for years, and that suggests that there are other cover-ups going on. And in fact, the Evening Standard published an article a few years ago about retired police officers coming forward and wanting to talk about how they were told to have a hands-off attitude towards cases where VIPs were named as child sex abusers. So this has been going on for years.
Well, I mean, I've got my own experiences, but I've had a senior member of the paedophile unit was telling me about Leon Britton, and said, you know, and there was others. If you look at Dolphin Square, where the abuse went on, there was a police officer from Rochester Road Police Station approached me, and he said, look, we were all told to stay away, not to stop any cars going into or out of Dolphin Square at night. If we did, we face discipline. If you look at the video by Culture Club, Do You Really Want to Hurt Me? It actually shows, listen to the lyrics, do you really want to hurt me? Do you really want to make me cry? And it's filmed, some of that it makes alludes to Dolphin Square, the swimming pool gymnasium, where a lot of the abuse went on. You know, so it's been going on and on and on. So anyone who dissents this and rubbishes it, they're talking absolute bullshit, and they are actually part of the problem, not part of the solution. So again, we don't need to take any reference from these people because they're wrong-uns.
Yes.
You know?
And ask your MP to ask the Home Secretary and the Justice Secretary, what are they doing to investigate the many allegations that have been made over many years about VIPs involved in child sex abuse or SRA? Because there have been, as we can see from the Reigns list, many VIPs named as being involved in Satanist ritual abuse. So are any measures being taken to deal with this? Proper investigation? And then you can mention that, you know, Carl Beach was just one person. So whether he was telling a lie or not, why are they concentrating so much on one person when so many child sex abuse survivors and SRA survivors have been talking about VIPs for so many years? That's ridiculous. That's not the way to conduct any proper investigation at all.
I mean, we had it with Jimmy Savile. There was witnesses saying that he was at rituals wearing cloaks. Freddie Mercury openly stated about devil worship. Bob Dylan. There's so many people that were high up that have gone on to say that they worship the devil. They sold their soul in order to go forward. So this isn't big news. We know about it, and it's on the internet.
Well, you can mention that as well in the letter to the Home Secretary. Jimmy Savile, people keep asking, how did he manage to get away with his crimes for so many years?
Yeah.
My simple answer to this, short answer to this, is because he was a Satanist, and Satanists often have the connections to help them avoid law enforcement. Not always, as we see from the successfully prosecuted cases, but they often do have connections that help to cover up their crimes. Now, there was an individual who took a very good and constructive initiative to do research and collect information on Jimmy Savile's regular visits to a town in the north where he participated in Satanist rituals. And this individual then shared his research with the Sunday Express newspaper, and they did their third article on Jimmy Savile's SRA as a result of this man's good research. So that's another thing one can do, to research your local area about the SRA that's going on. Unfortunately, most towns and cities in this country have SRA covens doing SRA, and collect the information. We need information collection. We need evidence collection.
Yeah.
And everyone can do their part with their own locality, and they'll hear things and know things are going on.
And on the internet, you can get a list of the satanic calendar. I think the 11th is a satanic date as well. Tomorrow is a satanic date. I've got it. Someone I know that's a victim of SRA sends me through the list, and of course these dates trigger them as well, because they don't know why, but when they look at the dates, they coincide with feelings of extreme depression, suicidal tendencies, fear, and everything, because it's hardwired into them. But so and points of reference, if people want to research it for the right reasons, I mean, what literature out there for them to sort of take reference to?
There are some good books that can be obtained from Amazon, including Blasphemous Rumors by Andrew Boyd.
Yeah, I read that.
He was one of the people, the journalists who made a list of the successfully prosecuted cases. Then there's Chasing Satan by Diane Kaur. There's a very good book called Children for the Devil by Tim Tate, but it's not available on Amazon anymore. I understand it can be obtained at the British Library, so it's possible to go there and read the book. There's also a couple of books by other people from other countries. A therapist named Alison Miller, who wrote a book called Healing the Unimaginable, which is a relatively good book on based on survivor testimonies. There's also a book called Behind Enemy Lines by a Scottish writer, Laurie Matthew. A Scottish writer, Laurie Matthew, who works with SRA survivors, and she collected several SRA survivors' testimonies and put it together in the book. There are books coming out on these issues over the years, which is a good thing. But we also need to talk about it more. We need to spread the word. We need to spread the message about SRA. Very basic thing. We need to call SRA SRA, Satanist Ritual Abuse. 3 words. It doesn't cost you anything to just mention it, to say it. It costs a lot if you don't mention it, because then you're helping to keep it hidden. The reason I say this is, and I can't understand why so many people in our society self-censor. They censor themselves from mentioning SRA, as if the roof is going to fall on their heads when they mention it. Yeah. That is stupid. You know, we're not living in North Korea yet. We can still have some freedom of expression.
Yeah.
But if we keep self-censoring ourselves, the time will come when we will be censored from mentioning it, because we've handed over free of charge so much power to the Satanists. We got to use our freedom, as they say, use it or lose it, and we got to be willing to fight for it, and we got to be willing to speak out boldly. Doesn't matter if you feel the fear, get over it and speak out. It's a bit like somebody standing at the edge of a pool and debating with themselves whether to go into the swimming pool or not. Just go over the edge, get into the pool, and you'll later look back and wonder why you were so worried in the first place. You know, we need to just speak out about SRA and speak it out clearly. And if people don't like it, let them get over themselves. Just keep speaking about it. You will meet people who are concerned about this issue, just as I have. I've come across a lot of people who don't want to know, but I've also come across a lot of people who do want to know and do want to help. So there's a lot of goodwill out there. There's a lot of people who do care about protecting children, who do want to protect children from this evil, but they don't know about it. So you got to raise their awareness. You got to talk to them about SRA. Don't call it pedophilia. It's not pedophilia, strictly speaking. Some Satanist abusers are pedophiles, but many are not. Many are just doing what their belief system tells them to do, and do not have a particularly strong sexual attraction to children. Call it by its right name, which is Satanist ritual abuse.
And one of the things that was said to me was that people have used a defence that they're a Satanist to get away with abusing children. And what was said to me, look, they abuse the children not because they're coerced by the Satanic Coven. They do it because they enjoy it. They enjoy raping and abusing children, whether they're in a Satanic Coven or not. Either way, they enjoy it, and don't ever be misguided by the fact that they were frightened or everything else. No, they did it because they wanted to do it, and it empowered them, and it fed their perversion, you know. And like you say, if we don't do something, then who's next? And it's got to stop. And these are people that hide behind the covert nature of what they're doing. They're frightened of exposure. You know, when someone said to me, John, when you shine a light in the sewer, the rats run for cover. And this is what these rats are doing at the moment. So let's look out and actually be grateful when these attacks come, and they will come on the internet, because they're going to expose them, you know, and that will be a start. Let's see who starts putting this vile nonsense out once we've given this. But also, let's give a word of hope out there, Wilfred, you know, to those that have endured this horrific abuse. You know, what can we do for them? How can they get in touch with us? You know, and what's the next step forward?
Yes, having started on this issue in the early 90s, I would say that the period since 2011, when Jimmy Savile was publicly exposed, there has been an increasing openness to look at SRA and to talk about SRA in the UK. and people are becoming better informed on this subject, and people are questioning more and more aware of cover-ups going on. These are not simply conspiracy theories, which is what, of course, the Satanists want you to believe. They want to say, this is just a conspiracy theory. Well, there are conspiracy theories that are absurd, and there are conspiracy theories that are backed by facts and evidence. And SRA is backed by facts and evidence. And these are conspiracy facts, because people do sometimes conspire to do evil.
Oh, yeah.
And we know that from history. Winston Churchill could have been accused of being a conspiracy theorist when he said that Germany was rearming and in order to wage war against Europe. He could have been accused of being a conspiracy theorist, but history shows us he was absolutely right. And one of the crimes that the Nazi war leaders were charged with in the Nuremberg trials was conspiracy to commit war. And as you know, as a police detective, there are crimes which are conspiracy. Yeah.
You know, the only people that can't conspire are husband and wife.
Yeah.
Apart from that, everyone can conspire.
Exactly. So conspiracies do happen. You have to be incredibly naive to think they don't. But we shouldn't be distracted by absurd conspiracy theories, because there are people who manufacture absurd ones or follow any...
Oh, I get accused of them all day long, like MI5 and all this sort of nonsense.
I mean, people with very colourful imaginations. Yeah. This is just a red herring. We need to be aware that there is evil being conspired against children and vulnerable adults. It's always about the children when it comes to evil. When it comes to Satanism, it's always about the children.
Yeah.
And they want to target the children. They want to indoctrinate them. They want to make them into images of themselves. And we need to speak out. We need to stand for these vulnerable people. We need to fight for justice. We need to expose the evil. All of us can do this. Writing to your MP, speaking out, writing to the newspaper if necessary. If you have a blog, mentioning it on your blog. There's a lot we can do if we are willing to do it. The trouble is, too many people in our society want to be cabbages. You know, a cabbage doesn't do anything. It just sits there. And they want to go through their life as a cabbage. And at the end of their lives, they'll probably regret it. And they'll think, well, what have I ever moved?
Of course, yeah.
I haven't moved anything.
Yeah.
I'll never move anything in this world except the soil that it takes to bury me. That is not the reason why we're in this world. We're in this world to make a difference, a positive difference. And not just to be a permanent bystander and spectator and always making up excuses to do nothing. You know, and as Jesus said in the Bible, we should be good Samaritans. And he said at the end of the parable of the Good Samaritan, go and do likewise. He told people to go and do as the Good Samaritan did. And that is what we are supposed to do. And that will not only benefit the vulnerable, it will benefit us because it protects our freedoms and our society from this threat.
Well, you're mentioning Jesus there because, again, I follow Jesus. I think he was the bravest man that ever lived and the toughest man that ever lived and the only king that ever lived. Yet he owned nothing, you know, and all he was down there was to protect the children. But there are some people that say to me, I don't believe in that. I don't believe in that. And one of the reasons, like I mentioned earlier, was that they were abused in a religious institution. But we are dealing with a negative religious thing here, which is Satanism. And we need that spiritual protection because sometimes that's all we have left. I mean, I always encourage people to have Jesus around you. Just cause don't worry about the Catholic Church. I've washed my hands with the Catholic Church anyway. Don't worry about the Protestant Church. It's not about Jesus. Was never about the church. He predated the church. There is evil in this world, and there is good in this world, and we can align to. We have a freedom of choice to align with one or align with the other. You know, there's no middle ground here. You know, and but what do you say to people that have sort of lost their way a bit on the faith front? You know, for reasons that we've explained. You know,
as I pointed out earlier, the Satanists like to do things which achieve multiple objectives. One of which is to abuse children in churches and to infiltrate churches so that if it gets exposed, the church looks bad. Yep. And so that the victims of the SRA who have been abused in churches will always have a phobia about the church,
Right. Yeah.
and a phobia about Christianity.
Yes.
And this, we need to make a clear distinction between Satanists infiltrating a church who are fake Christians, not real ones, using the church premises for SRA, which has nothing to do with Christianity, in order to give their victims a phobia against Christianity, and also in order to desecrate the church. These people are no more Christians than I am a Buddhist, for example, or a Hare Krishna. They are fakes, and this is typical of the way that Satanists behave. They're always wearing disguises, always pretending to be something they're not. And so this distinction, this factual distinction, needs to be made. Secondly, that at the end of the day, it's about a relationship, a personal relationship with God through Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And that being a friend of Jesus will give a person the protection they need, will give them the power they need and the strength they need to tackle this issue, to deal with it effectively. It will bless their lives. Of course, the Satanists don't want them to turn to Jesus. No, but I've noticed that a lot of people who come out of Satanism, and you and I know some of these people,
they go straight to Jesus.
They go straight to Jesus because they know that this is the real light. This is the true light, the only light.
And I've spoke to, say, we know one, and we've had long conversations with a guy, and there's quite a few now that have come and spoke to me and they've done it for Jesus.
Yeah, exactly. That it's the secret weapon that we have against Satanism and SRA is Jesus Christ. But even if you're not a believer in Jesus, you know from your own conscience that this is terribly evil and needs to be opposed, and needs to be exposed, and needs to be fought against. You don't have to be a Christian to know that this is wrong, and to know that you ought to be doing what you can to fight against it. And so, by all means, do something about it. Do something against SRA. In fact, I've met some non-Christians who speak out more against SRA than Christians do. Good for them. But of course, Christians could do and should do a lot more on this issue. The problem, as we discussed earlier, was self-censorship and fear. And, we are not put in this world to always be fearful about things. We are only restricting ourselves if we are. We will never realize whatever potential we have if we're always using fear as an excuse. Because we are also blessed when we help those who are vulnerable. It's a two-way street. You bless the vulnerable, but you get blessed as well.
No, you get a lot out of helping people. I certainly do. I enjoy it, and I see that as my little mission, and it's what I want to do.
Yes.
And I want to stop children getting hurt. It's as simple as that. I
so
don't like bullies.
The blessings go both ways.
Yeah. And that's right. So, well, I'm going to be carry on doing what I'm doing, and I'm going to be linking in with Wilfred. People can get in touch with me. We've got the Jon Wedger Foundation at gmail.com. You can email me, get through to me that way. I've got a Facebook page, and if you need to get in touch with Wilfred, they can send me emails, which people have been doing, and I have been putting them through to yourself.
You can forward them to me.
Forward to yourself. So, but just quickly coming up. Oh, I just know that this is a little joystick that we've attached to the mic. Any sort of questions of note of any come up from the? There was one from someone, Brian. Brian, you was asking if it was a certain person. Yes, it is that person. That has worked for the satirical magazine who always attacks anyone speaking out over this. And but is there anything else you'd like to add on a sort of a closing note to this, Wilfred?
Yes, just on the point of taking action, we all can use our initiative and creativity to think of ways that we can get the message out, and I think we should. So what I've suggested in terms of suggested action is certainly not an exhaustive list. There are many other things I'm sure that you could think of to help expose SRA. Half the battle on SRA in the UK is to expose it. Expose it very publicly. And I'll leave you with this story of a man a real hero who, during the Nazi occupation of France, rescued Jewish children from the concentration camps. And he set up an underground network to save these children. And he saved lots of children. After the war, he was asked if today there was atrocities against children, what would you advise us to do? And he said, shout and scream, and keep shouting and screaming until you get justice. And that was his advice based on his experience of saving children from the Nazis.
Yeah, and that's something that we're saying. This is not the time for silence. You've been silent too long. Their biggest weapon is our silence. You know, you speak out now and speak boldly. Be careful of libel laws, and we tread a very, very fine line here tonight, and we will continue to do so. We do not want to be the man down the well. Check out the parable of the man down the well if you don't get that one. Don't want to end up totally locked up for no reason and no voice. I want to carry on doing this. So for those that say Jon Wedger never named names, no, I'm not going to, and I won't. You know, unless they're dead or it's public domain, then I'll mention it. Otherwise, I ain't going to, sir. You ain't going to get any more names out of me. Anyone with half a modicum of intelligence knows who I'm on about anyway. So those that want something done, speak out. I can't help you if you don't help yourself. You know, be brave and just think of the fear of those poor children. You know, that's where the real fear lies. But whatever they've done to you, they've done it. You know, carry on. Let's move forward and let's stop them doing it to someone else. That's you know, that's part of the reason why I don't want to do it. I don't want anyone to go through what I've gone through, and I don't want to see no more suicides because of this, no more drug addiction. I've got two brilliant friends that were abused in an SRA environment, and I see the damage it does to them, and I see it, and it's appalling, and it really is wrong, and I'd love them to get the justice they deserve, you know. But is there anything we want from the camera crews? Any? Right, let me part over. Right, this is Trace. Do you want to come before? Right. Trace helps us out a lot. I always make reference to Tracy, and Tracy does quite a lot with myself and Chris Lambriano as well. So I'm going to pass over to Trace.
I think you just touched on about the victims and what they go through as adults, and you just mentioned about those friends. This is the thing that's wrong with me through the entire interview, is they are now adults and they are amongst our society. Yeah. Do we see them? Do we understand them? Are we willing just to, you know, ignore them? Do we talk to people? How can we move people into the right position that they actually get help, literally through therapies? What is that pathway? How can we actually help them now they've gone through such terrible experiences? What do we do, Jon?
Yeah, well, I mean, it all comes down to judgment as well. I was with a leading reporter for BBC 4, Radio 4, and we sat down outside a coffee shop in central London, and she wanted me to show her the child prostitution scene. And again, I get attacked for saying that term, and I don't care. I'm going to carry on saying it because it's an appalling thing that happened, so it's an appalling term as well. And I said, I'll show you child prostitutes. And the next thing, this guy come over begging, and I said, I've got no money, my brother. I said, but I've got tobacco. Help yourself to some tobacco. And he did. I said, roll a cigarette for you and roll one for me. And he did. And he asked what we were doing because the recording equipment was out, and I explained our purpose for being there. And he said, well, look no further than me. I was one of those children that was pimped out. He said, not just me, my brother. His brother was begging, you know, as well, called over. Then they called over a girl who was outside Sainsbury's begging. They're there. That's where they are traced, you know, the damage it does. So it is the beggar on the street, the drug addicts, the alcoholic, you know, the mental health problems. We're not addressing it. We're medicating them and locking them up, and inside they're screaming to be heard. One of the biggest forms of healing is to be witnessed and have your voice. And what I'm saying to you, have your voice. Let's put it across in a forthright way. I'll put your story away. I mean, we've got to have a little bit of judgment on what we put out and what we don't, because we've got to have a good chronology, and we've got to have something that people can relate to. Okay, so again, there may be a slight filtering process, but I'm willing to use my platform to give you witness, to get your names out there. Again, let's go by the libel laws as well, you know.
One lady said to me...
Sorry, can I just add to what Jon said? I knew a a homeless lady once who was on the streets of London, and she had been sexually abused when she was 4 years old. And she told me that from her experience of years being homeless on the streets, more than 50% in her view of the homeless had been sexually abused as children, and that this had eventually led to them becoming homeless. Obviously, not all people who have been sexually abused end up on the streets, but a lot of them do. And it's the cost in people's lives that sex abuse inflicts on them, and Satanist ritual abuse inflicts on them. And these things are destroying our society and destroying the most vulnerable people in our society. And it would be unconscionable to do nothing about it. We need to speak out. We need to speak out about Satanist ritual abuse because it's the most hidden. But we also need to speak out about child sex abuse as well, because it is at a level that is epidemic. It is way too high for any society to keep experiencing without huge damage being done. On average, according to a newspaper article in The Independent last year, on average, every 8 minutes, report of child sex abuse is made in the UK, well, in England and Wales. That's not including Scotland and Northern Ireland. So the actual numbers being reported of child sex abuse are even higher than every 8 minutes when you include Scotland and Northern Ireland. This is just for England and Wales, and these are only those cases which are actually reported. A lot of them go unreported. So we're talking about child sex abuse, but of course this will also include a lot of SRA cases. So we're going up to epidemic levels, and if you were a reasonably minded person who cared about the vulnerable, you will care about what this is doing to children and vulnerable adults across our society. And you would want to do something, and you have the freedom to do something. You have the freedom to write to your MP. You have the freedom to go and see your MP. We can provide you the information you need if you feel you need more information. We can help you to speak out for the voiceless.
Yeah, it's just this one lady said to me that's been through terrible, terrible things. Just the thought makes you so, so sad. But she said, all I want is people to listen to me, show me love and empathy. That's all she asked for.
And that doesn't cost anything, does it?
No, that's all she asked for.
You know, so and that's why we do this, so we can give a voice to the previously unheard, and we'll happily do that. So people can get in touch with Tracy as well. You know, Tracy, you've got the Way of Life Foundation, and get in touch with me by the usual channel, and then get in touch with Wilfred, and we'll continue doing what we're doing. We're not going anywhere, and you know, and if anyone wants to help, then please do. We welcome all forms of help, whether it be money or support or whatever. There's professional people out there. One woman has got a doctorate in English. She's agreed to put together essays and letters and things like that, which is brilliant. I've got one fellow who's written to every MP. God bless you, Gordon. Well done. Thank you so much. So anyone who's got them little skills, you know, we welcome you. So please come forward. So we're going to have to wrap up. But Wilfred, listen, God bless you. You know, we'll carry on doing it. And thank you to Trace, you know, for organising everything. And, you know, hopefully there'll be a follow-up to this. Okay. And God bless.